Okay. Good morning. We're here to study God's Word. Uh, Isaiah chapter 51 is what we will be continuing. I think I'm going to pick it up at about verse number 9 to give proper context, and then my commentary will start on verse number 11. So Isaiah 51, starting with verse number 9. Okay? Isaiah 51, verse number 9. It goes, "Awake, awake, clothe yourselves with strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in days gone by, as in generations of old. Was it not you who cut Rahab to pieces, who pierced that monster through? Was it not you who dried out the sea, the waters of the great deep, who made a road in the depths of the sea, so that the redeemed might cross over?" So it seems to be talking here in terms of the one referred to is the arm of the Lord, and that is his presence itself. The arm of the Lord. So it's really talking in terms of the people. Pay attention to what the Lord has done. He's vanquished your enemies in days past, and you crossed the waters safely, which is a reference to the Egypt experience. And then comes verse number 11. "The ransomed of the Lord will turn. They will enter Zion with singing. Everlasting joy will crown their hearts." The Isaiah prophet turns to prophetic visions of the future of Israel. The ransomed of the Lord will be whom, do you think?
Jesus.
What?
Jesus.
I got you just at the right time. Okay. Yeah, the children of Israel, yeah. The ransomed of the Lord, the believers. Ransomed of the Lord will return. Return to where?
Zion.
To Zion. Yeah, the term Zion is frequently thrown around in prophetic words. It's like, well, I hate to use this term, but it would be like Minneapolis in terms of a city that commonly identifies a whole area. All right? I often say, "Where do you live?" People will ask me, "Where do you live?" I'll say, "Minneapolis." No, it's really Lakeville. Okay? But it's like a suburb, a southern suburb of Minneapolis. Probably if you were to, so people would ask you, "Where do you live?" you would say what? What? Faribault.
Yes.
You'd identify your town. You see, you're far enough away to have a specific identity and to relate as a community. I think I've heard people say, kind of have the attitude of, "Well, if it's not in Faribault, we don't need it." Is that a common attitude?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because you pretty much have everything put together down here, do you not?
Yes.
Okay? Major identity, major manufacturing area. You have big schools. I don't know anything about the School of the Deaf in town, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, major things happening here. Is it a county seat?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, you pretty much the seat of government and manufacturing and all the things that identify pretty much self-sufficient community. Don't need much but what is here. All right, so the Zion is a reference to what used to be the high place in the city of Jerusalem. What was that? The high place. The Temple Mount, yeah, right. Now today, if you go to on a trip to Israel, they refer to Mount Zion, and it is not the Temple Mount. It is a high place in the city, a bit south and west of the Temple Mount, as I recall. But okay, But Zion is a reference to the Temple Mount. They will enter Jerusalem with singing, everlasting joy will crown their heads, gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee away. So that's prophetic future vision of the time of the messianic dominance. But also I think kind of Isaiah was thinking not just of their return to the city of Zion from Babylon. The joy of the return was only a foretaste of the joy God's people would experience as a result of his redemption through the servant that we've been talking about, and their return to the promised land in the millennium, at the end of the millennium actually. See, we have a vision of millennium that's different from many of the visions of the millennium that have been popularized in times like the 70s, and a bit of a revision here currently of this vision that there'll be a millennium period where Christ will reign uninhibitedly, and then Christ will come, okay? Where Christianity will dominate the realm of the rules of the world, and then Christ will come at the end after a time of intense persecution. Well, we view the millennium as the entire period of time where Christ has risen. We're in fact in the millennium now, and we understand that Jesus is at the right hand of the Father in eternity, ruling the order of creation till the grand day of his re-entrance into the human history. So we are often called amillennialists. That means against the millennium, but the truth is that we just have a different vision of it. Verse number 12, I am he who comforts you. Who are you that you are afraid of man who dies, of the Son of Man who made him, who is made like grass? So God's attitude toward his people is reflected here, and he's very concerned about what among them? What is he concerned about among his people in verse 12?
That we would fear mortal men.
Right. In fact, we would fear mortal men, that we have greater respect for mortal men than we do for him. I think it's easy for today's church to get caught up in that. I think the closer we get to a presidential election, that phenomenon will surface among churches across our land. I'm critical of churches that accept politicians in, and politicians take over the pulpit and the Bible classes and the environment for a day and a half or two on a given weekend during the course of the year. Why would I be critical of that? Because I'm a terribly critical person? No. Why would I be critical of that?
Because it's too much on man, not enough on the Lord.
It's in line with this. We have greater regard for the opinion of our politicians than we do for the regard of our regard for the Lord or the gospel. That's very hard to say. Again, people suffer from a theologization, I just invented a word, of our American experience. We have theologized the experience of America to the point where it becomes so intermingled with our religion that we can't separate them in our heads. And Lutherans have never been that way. But okay. What we have said is that there's the realm of power, which involves politics and government and all of that, and then there's the realm of grace, and we live in the kingdom of grace, where the rules of the road is by grace are you saved through faith in Jesus Christ and him alone. That's our rule. That's our principle. That's our organizing foundation. and the government is the realm of power, the realm outside, the realm of grace. But okay, comment in verse 12, the Lord describes himself again as the only true, self-existent God. Such an one as he would indeed comfort his people. Who were the Israelites, that they should fear the Babylonians or any other human enemy? They were only mortals. The immortal God would defend them. Go on to verse number 13. You have forgotten the Lord your Maker, who stretched out the heavens and laid the foundations of the earth. Isaiah has made that quite clear, that he is the one who established the balance of the universal order, the created order. And you fear continually all the day because of the wrath of the oppressor, when he sets himself to destroy. And where is the wrath of the oppressor? So the wrath of the oppressor in that day would have been what?
Babylonia.
Well, yeah. He's backing down to the time that they were currently living. He was projecting into a time when they would return from Babylon, but now he's talking to them about how they feel under the potential dominance of Assyria. Okay? It goes on, and where is the wrath of the oppressor? The Israelites had forgotten the type of person Yahweh, their Maker, the Creator, was, or they would not have been afraid. To live in fear of humans is to have effectively forgotten God, is the little paragraph that I'm reading now. It's easy to say certain theological correct things, such as there is both the worlds and our Maker, that he is the one who stretched out the heavens and founded the earth, while giving the lie to those fine words by our continually living as though he can do nothing to prevent humans from doing ultimate harm to us. Yes, oppressors may hurt us, even kill us, but they do not have the power to make us fear them or hate them. Oppressors may hurt us, even kill us, but they do not have the power to make us fear them or hate them. All right? Verse 14. He who is bowed down shall speedily be released. He shall not die and go down to the pit, neither shall his bread be lacking. This is a promise from God here. Promise to free the exiles soon and to supply their needs. Westerners tend to read verses like this one through individualistic glasses. We ask if there were not individuals who died in the exile, and there probably were. The prophet's perspective was much more collective. He viewed the Israelites as a unit. By saying they would not die in exile, he meant that the nation would not cease to exist while in captivity. While that was true of the Babylonian exiles, the promise of salvation in this section of the book anticipated a larger spiritual redemption as well, as I have noted. In fact, life in Babylon exile was far from harsh for most of the Israelites, so much so that most of them, and this is interesting, most of them chose not to return to the promised land when they could. So some of the people had learned to live effectively in the society of Babylon. They made businesses, they built their homes, they did their farms, they prospered. In spite of the fact that the Babylonians could not and would not accept their expression of faith or their practice of that faith.
But they let them practice their faith. Did they?
After they had a lot of conflicts over it.
Yeah.
We learned earlier on in the story of the Babylonian exile with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. What was that about? It was a conflict that they had of the practice of the faith of the Israelis in that environment. Wherever Israelis have moved, they have a tendency to cluster and to be separate. And for that they're often criticized and ridiculed. They are not easily assimilated into any given culture. Even in my life experience, I've seen how a cluster of Jewish folk can be beneficial. Particularly, I worked as a shoe salesman for 8 years, through college and seminary, part-time. My first boss was Solomon Smith. Solomon was a grandfatherly type who kind of adopted me. So I really appreciated Solomon. My second boss was named Irving Braverman. He was also what? A Jewish boss, yeah. His theme for life was shoot while the ducks are flying or eat tail feathers. That was his basic philosophy of business. This is a different man. But he had been established in his business endeavor by the local Jewish community, which rallied around him when he first came to town, provided finances and backing for the establishment of the business that he had. So he was very much beholding to the Jewish community. And okay, he was not at all as genteel as Solomon was, but okay. But that's one of the dimensions of separateness is the positive side in terms of support for that community as well. I wonder, this is something that I'm going to be wondering now. I'm wondering out loud. Got it? This is not biblical teaching. This is me looking at my own life experience and asking myself, am I a privileged person? You wouldn't know that. Am I a privileged person? Did I get an extra push from the fact that I am who I am, Polish and white, and I have been young.
You've been blessed.
Yeah, blessed.
I've
You're
been
as lucky
blessed.
as you're ever gonna be. Yeah.
I've been blessed. Yeah, well, see, I remember going to the county, well, I'm a sociology grad. Went to Southern Illinois University. I needed a job right after college, before I went to seminary. We were going to be married, I needed a job. And Solomon's part-time job wasn't enough, although I still worked for him. But, so I decided to apply to the state for a job. And I applied to be a social aid caseworker. And do you know what that is? Social aid caseworker, which means that you go representing the state into the towns of the city to people who are receiving benefits from the state. Okay? A caseworker does that. I needed a recommendation for that position. So I went to the county supervisor of social aid caseworkers, as it were. And he immediately accepted me. Questioned not much about my background, but immediately accepted me and made me eligible to take the eligibility test, which I still had to go through. And it turns out that I took that test, I took a prayer. The prayer, Lord, if you want me to go to the seminary, somehow show it through this testing process. Well, apparently the Lord was in favor of my going to the seminary, because what I did on the test was a superlative grade, which was a surprise to me. Okay, but okay. I think I got one of the highest grades ever on that eligibility test. So I became a social aid caseworker, and I enjoyed my period of time. I served in the ghetto of East St. Louis, Missouri, Illinois. Anyone know where that is?
Lived there,
You lived there?
Collinsville.
Oh, yeah. You lived in Collinsville? Sure. Well, I had lived in Belleville,
Yeah.
down the
I went
road.
to SIU also.
Yeah, that's right. And spent a year going in and out of the ghetto before seminary, which took place shortly thereafter. But okay, so the point, how did I get to that? Oh, have I been privileged because of my background, is the word. And I think maybe so. But then people are attracted to people like them, are they not? We identify with people with whom we identify with. There's probably too many withs in that. But yeah, it's kind of a true phase in terms of characterization of us. But all right,
So,
yeah,
clarify now, you were a caseworker in East St. Louis?
yeah.
That's pretty good. Here's a story on East St. Louis. If you didn't know East St. Louis, it's well known for its hard times. So anyway, in the movie Vacation, Chevy Chase and his wife are going on that vacation. When they get, they pull off, they get a little lost, and he goes down his window and asks for direction. Well, that's East St. Louis. Meanwhile, this guy's talking to him, getting directions, and they're taking the tires off of his car and stealing everything. That's East St. Louis. Anyway, go on.
Okay,
You're a tough guy.
I speak up for my people in East St. Louis.
Yeah.
They were very good, loving people in that environment. I remember visiting a lady, my heart goes with this. She lived in a wood frame building, and the wood frame building was the third floor up, across the road from the stockyards in East St. Louis. The only way to get to it was to go up some exterior wooden stairs. The building was gray and dilapidated. And I went into her home to assess her eligibility. She was used to this. She was older. I opened the door, went in, sat down, we talked. She made all kinds of excuses about having a metal pot-belly wood stove. Why would she make excuses for that? It's a wood frame building, hello, on the third floor. All right? But that's the only source of heat she had. So she showed me the receipts for it. We got to talking. What's your future, young man? She said. I talked about going to the seminary. I wasn't hiding it. And then oh, you're a Christian. And we clicked immediately. She prayed for me, I prayed for her. Wonderful black woman. She was just a great person. All right. I met another man who had worked for the state for 25 years and was very indignant about being on public assistance. He was indignant because he had worked a full-time job before he applied to the state for a job. And he got that job when he had turned 65. So he worked for them for 25 years. All right? Applied for for his pension. And they denied him his pension because he had lied about his age. So he was indignant. He was getting public assistance when he didn't feel he deserved that fate. He's a very proud man, a very hard worker, another black man that I knew. I had black bosses, black co-workers, and me, a little boy from southern Illinois, in Belleville across the river from a Germanic community. Did I feel sometimes out of place? Yes, I did. I think that God used that to soften my heart on the matter of interracial relationships and that phenomenon. So God softened my heart on that, but all right. It goes on. Verse number 14, I guess. He who is bowed down shall speedily be released. He shall not die and go down to the pit, neither shall his bread be lacking. So God promises to free the exiles, to supply for their needs. We tend to make this individual, but the Lord is speaking more corporately. Verse number 15, I am the Lord your God who stirs up the sea, so that its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. I get the feeling whenever you hear a verse like this, that the Lord is like reintroducing himself to his people. I am the Lord your God. Remember that. Oh, I've forgotten it. I said in the sermon for the day, I mentioned a time when I had kind of felt the trouble of a ministry and pressure in ministry. That happened during a time when I guess you could say it was sort of at the highlight of my ministry, the top point of my ministry. I had become rather arrogant because things are going so well. All right? And with prosperity there is a trap. And with advancement there is a trap. It is something called arrogance. And I had fallen into that. But my brother from Florida, who had been a seminary companion, heard of my plight. How, I don't know. I said, can I come and visit you? He reminded me that I had been accepted, an accepted son of God, in a way that was totally refreshing. I knew that. I believed that. But I had placed that attitudinally into the background of my life, and I had put my ego in front of all of that. So I committed the sin that the Lord is dealing with here among the children of Israel. Have you ever gone through that time where you seem to have lost yourself? Kind of get caught up in yourself?
I have a wife to remind me of that.
Good. Actually, I do too, so good news. All right? Anybody else have gone through that kind of period? We go through periods of arrogance, and it's all part of growing up. All right? So I have been in a position to counsel pastors who are going through their periods of arrogance. Been there, done that.
Aren't you least likely to take help when you're in an arrogant phase?
What?
Aren't you least likely to take help when you're in an arrogant phase?
Yes, of course you are. When you're arrogant, you're least likely
So why did you go to this guy?
What?
So why did you go to this guy?
Well, I got into stress over it. All right? The arrogance had come back to hit me in the head. So I've been through good times and bad times in ministry. Sometimes my fault, sometimes somebody else's fault. But that's the life in public ministry. Anything else? Yeah.
It seems God always has a way of humbling us.
Sure he does.
And it takes a while to wake up and realize that at times.
Oh, that's really true. Really true. Sooner or later we grow up. If God's patient enough. All right. I am the Lord your God, who stirs up the sea so that its waves roar. The Lord of hosts is his name. By the way, we have had an earthquake recently. So, what's the question? We had a couple of hurricanes come into the United States years ago, this last year. Florida in the United States. So what's the question?
I suppose, why does God allow these catastrophes?
What?
Why does God allow it?
Why does God allow it?
But I think it's just like what it says here, that he is almighty. I mean, he's the only one that can control it or understand it. We don't understand it.
Say that again.
I'm saying, I don't think there's any real answer as to why God allows that kind of thing, other than that he's showing us that he has more power and he has things in control that we have no control over.
That's ultimately the lesson that we come away from. As we said, well, the Lord has power. Yeah, that's true. But more often the question that people ask is, why did God do that? Why did God allow that? What is the answer to that question?
Were the people wicked in that country? Are the people extremely wicked in those countries?
I'm sorry, what?
Wicked, are the people wicked in those countries?
Boy, if that were the case, wouldn't we all be shriveled up and gone? Here's the story. God created a perfect world. It was in perfect harmony. We were in harmony with him. We were in harmony with one another. We were in harmony with a perfectly organized, created order. We fell into, I hear it, what? We fell into sin. Look sometime at Genesis 3 and ask, what are the consequences of sin? It's devastating. You knew there were consequences of sin because God walked in the garden and people did what? What? They hid. Alienation between humanity and God suddenly. He said, what have you done? What was the answer?
Neglect one another. Well,
The woman you gave
Adam
me.
and Eve.
The woman you gave me. All right? So there's now alienation as a consequence of sin between people. As judgment upon them, the Lord said, suddenly there's going to be alienation between you and the created order. What form did that take?
Well, pain and suffering and death and all that was the result.
Pain and suffering and death, yeah. I have an 8-inch scar on my chest. All right? Quadruple bypass surgery 23 years ago. That's a consequence of my heritage. All right? But that ultimately is the consequence of the fact that I'm alienated because of sin. Not particularly because this, that, or the other sin, but because of the phenomenon of sin. I live in a world alienated from my own body. All right? thankfully the real me one day will emanate from this, my own body, and be with the Lord. And I think I'm going to look back and say,
But God also gave man bypass surgery, how to do it.
that's true.
So
Mhm.
it's sort of like, yeah, we're real bad, but then there was some good.
Well, and that's a wonderful thing. I agree with you. In fact, I'm a great advocate of science and its development because it's a way that we can sustain our life and have more time so that the Lord can work on us longer. All right? Yeah, okay. But see that it's the consequence of sin. We're alienated from the created order. Because of that, we have to apply bug spray and fertilizer. I see all of that as a plus and a minus. It has to take place because we're alienated from the created order and dependent upon what we produce. It just goes on and on. So how does that play in? Well, we have had earthquakes because of the alienation that we experience from the created order. It goes back to Genesis. Now, to the average person, if you talk that explanation, they're going to think that you're buggy. Okay? But that's just the way it is. We are alienated from the created order, and we have to endure the pain that we suffer because we sometimes aren't so wise. I knew a man who worked for the state of Missouri whose job it was to acquire property for highway right-of-ways. Okay? He worked for the Army Corps of Engineers, and his name was Cheatham. Well, that's the truth. It's in the state of Missouri. He'd come and evaluate farms, and this Mr. Cheatham would go out and talk to them. But he had a certain degree of wisdom because he worked for the Army Corps of Engineers. He said the problem with all the floods we're having is that people continue to build on the floodplain. Did you hear that? People build on the floodplain. It's going to flood there, but we build there. And we do that all the time. We continue to do that, and our insurance companies are complaining up to their earlobes because of it. But all right, so we're kind of not always so smart, and we choose what appears to be attractive, but isn't always so smart.
Well, Faribault is doing that too.
Yeah,
What?
Faribault is building down by the railroad tracks, what was flooded severely a few years ago.
Yeah.
And they're putting a big
apartment building.
apartment building.
Yeah.
It's approved.
Mm-hmm. As long as they put it in pontoons, it'll be fine. 16, and I have put my words in your mouth and covered you in the shadow of my land, establishing the heavens and laying the foundations of the earth, and saying to Zion, you are my people. What a wonderful, embracing comment that is. He says, I have put my words in your mouth, speaking of the words of the prophets, speaking of the words that he gave Moses from the mountain, and that they have inherited in the writings and the counsel of God over the years past and through their experience of walking with him. Put my words in your mouth and covered you in the shadow of my hand. He's a protective cover over the shadow, like a hand covering an innocent little critter from the sunlight. Establishing the heavens and laying the foundations of the earth and saying to Zion, you are my people. What a wonderful embracing of it is. It goes on to say, I've got commentary on that. Though God spoke this verse to Israel, it is clear that only the ideal Israel, the servant, could be the ultimate fulfillment of what he said. He would use his servant message to create a new heavens and a new earth literally at the end of the time of creation. And he would use the servant Messiah to reaffirm his commitment to Israel in the future. So it's predictive of the coming of Christ, the era of the benefits of the coming of Christ. How God would use the servant to do all this becomes clearer in Isaiah 52 and into 53. That's the final servant song. This was a fitting, culminating assurance to the Israelites. Now God turned the tables on his people and called on them to awake. They needed to wake up to the fact that he would comfort them and punish their oppressors. The fact that the Babylonian captivity continues to lie unmentioned specifically in the text strengthens the impression that God had more than historic deliverance in view in what he promised. A greater future redemption is also in view, namely the one that the servant Jesus would bring about. So, he's saying, in essence, this commentator is saying, he didn't really say Babylon. He meant that, but didn't say Babylon because by not saying Babylon, it would have a broader implication into the future of the people of faith. Verse 17. Wake yourself, stand up, O Jerusalem, you who have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath, who have drunk from the dregs of the bowl the cup of staggering. What kind of impression do you get from this verse?
Warning. Change your ways.
Warning, change your way, call away, yeah. All right. And again, wake up, wake yourself up, stand up, O Jerusalem, you who have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath. So they were a people known to consume alcoholic beverages, and it refers to the impact of the overconsumption of alcoholic beverages on the human the human physical reality. You have drunk to the dregs the bowl, the cup of staggering. So in other words, you've taken my wrath to the point where you as it were stagger under the oppressive load and reality of it. Jerusalem had drunk a powerful liquid at the hand of her God. He had given her punishment to drink for her sins, and that punishment was what? Captivity, sure. Drinking a cup of wine is a figure of judgment. Judgment now lay in a state of stupor, but needed to arise because the Lord had a future for it. Verse 18, there is none to judge her among all the sons she has borne. There is none to take her by the hand among all the sons she has brought up. The she here was unable to stand up and walk on her own. It was so devastating that they had been the effects of the Lord's judgment on her. Moreover, she had no children or inhabitants to help her go home. So she stood kind of alone. Verse 19. These two things have happened to you. Who will console you? Devastation and destruction, famine and sword. Who will comfort you? It kind of speaks of a woman who is a widow and childless had fallen upon her. There were none to mourn for her. Furthermore, devastation, destruction, famine, and the sword had overtaken her. Since she deserved her punishment, the Lord could not comfort her as he could have if she had been an innocent victim. So in those days, to be a widow and alone was ultimate devastation because they were so dependent upon family structure and family support and family care. Sometimes we look out, all of us do, at one time or another in our life and say, will our kids be there? Will our kids be there? Will we be alone? What's the answer to that?
Well, we're never alone. Christ is always with us.
The Lord is with us. Sometimes we think, yes, we are alone. And sometimes we're alone, and our kids are not always as responsive as we wish they were. What's the answer to that?
Make other friends. Make other friends.
Make other friends.
Join the joy group or the something.
Join the what?
Joy group.
The joy group.
Yeah.
Okay, so seek companionship in the community. Join a church. Ta-da. Sit in a Bible class. All right. Make friends that way. Link with other people. The Lord has created a Christian community that we are part of, and that's one of the reasons that we participate in it, I think. So, when we moved from here, or from Cleveland suburbs to the suburbs of Minneapolis in 2016, one of the first things we did was show up at a church. All right? I encouraged my wife to join things. My wife is a very embracing person. She's a good networker, better I think than I am. All right? On the first Sunday we came to that church, the Lord opened community to us, and particularly to me. I announced on that day, the pastor of that church, on the first day we attended, he said, I've just accepted the call to become the assistant to the president of the district. And okay. So I said hello to him that day and offered my help if he needed any, or if they needed any. Zip, 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 zip. Before I knew it, I was suddenly serving in that church. They called another pastor, and I was nurturing a younger pastor. I served as full-time pastor. I served as his assistant, yada, yada. And I have been bopping around from church to church thereafter. My wife has become deeply involved in the church in Lakeville. She has lots of good friends. That's kind of how that works. So there is a community where you can find community and where the Lord provides it. So we're not always as devastated as the widow here. Verse 20, your sons have fainted. They lie at the head of every street like an antelope in a net. They are full of the wrath of the Lord, the rebuke of your God. Oh, that's devastating. Today there's conflict in Israel between the Jewish population, the Arab population. It kind of started about 3 to 4 weeks ago, maybe a month and a half ago, in a town called Jenin. Jenin is a Palestinian town. We were there on a tour, and it was unusual for us to be there on the tour because they were so doggone rebellious. And they were a source of trouble from the Jewish side. From their side, the Jewish side was the source of the trouble. The conflict goes on and on and on. But this makes me think of Janine for some reason, because there's been loss of life and devastation, and I think that's what this highlights. So it goes on, the children were just as helpless as their mother. In one sense, Israel had no children to help her. This is one way of saying she could not help herself. But in another sense, the children she did have, her descendants, couldn't help her either. The mother and her children are both figures of Israel. The children lay at major intersections of the city as exhausted as an antelope caught in a net by its hunters. They too had suffered the wrath and the rebuke of their God. Verse 21 is where we pick it up next week. Okay? Any questions? Yes?
So with these words of Isaiah being preached in the temple, what went on in the temple on their services? Did they sing and preach of the Old Testament? Then?
In other words, how did Isaiah broadcast his message?
Yes.
Probably in the corner, in the streets, in the message, in the writings. The writings would be quote, published, shared from place to place. I imagine that's how it happened. This was written by a scribe who probably listened to the words of Isaiah and put them down. All right? Anything else?
Then the mountains, Mount Zion, close to Jerusalem, how high is that? Is that a big mountain? Or is it-
No, it's not much of a mountain at all. It's not as high. It's a high place. It's not as high as the Temple Mount at all. Okay, let's close with a prayer. Lord, thank you for being with us, for giving us your word, and the strength that comes from your Spirit's presence among us. We sense our alienation this day, but at the same time long for the community, the blessedness of being part of those who care and part of